Well, 15 years is a long time to do anything. And it's a particularly long time to do anything in the arts. And particularly an organization like this, what it continually suffers from, any of these nonprofit organizations that depend upon volunteer work, is a continuity. And people who are steadily there, and how rare it is to find a person who will stay and do what is necessary, not only month after month, but year after year. And Kevin is quite remarkable this way. Not many people would have the skills to get along with the various members of the board year after year as it changes and swirls around. And the Poetry Center has done so many interesting things during Kevin's tenure, which he was deeply involved with and skillful at executing. And as Erica so wisely said, showed the way, and didn't insist on being the figure in front of things all the time, but was the figure that enabled the thing to happen, whether it is the Markham House or whether it is the wonderful poetry weekends that Sally went on. But I want to take you back to the dark days when Kevin first came onto the board. And snow was in Valley Forge, and it was a dark time for the history of the Western world. And so our benefactor, who for several years had provided the money for a director to run the center, and went on to other things, and our board had just sort of been relying on her to take care of things, and then all of a sudden the money ran out and she left and went to Maine. And it was a dark moment. It was the Valentine's Day reading had been set up, but the only thing that had happened was that the money had been given for the rental of the place, but nothing had happened about getting publicity out or doing any of those things that you need to make an event successful. So there we were. And at the dark moment here, a little mythologizing going on, but not much. No, at the dark moment, Kevin strode into the system and helped out the board. A disillusioned, weak, discouraged group, ready to give up and say, well, we've had a 20-year run, we don't need to go on anymore, we've done more than most nonprofits have done already. But this is what, so Peterson came to Kevin and said, oh, that we had here but 1/10,000 of those poets in Palo Alto that do no work today. Shakespeare helped with this script, by the way. So this is what Kevin replied. Who is he that wishes so? My friend Peterson? No, my fair friend. If we are doomed to fail, we are enough to bear our center's loss. And if to live, the fewer poets, the greater our share of caesura. God's will, I pray thee, wish not one poet more. By the muse, I am not covetous for titles. Such outward things dwell not in my desires. But if it be a sin to covet Poetry Center's survival, I am the most offending soul alive. No, faith, my friend, wish not for a poet from Palo Alto. Oh, do not wish from one more. Rather proclaim it, Peterson, to the standing board, that he or she who hath no stomach for this fight for our survival, let them depart. Letters of commendation shall be writ, and leads to other non-profits most freely given. And we would not fail in that person's company that fears his fellowship to fail with us. This day is called the Feast of St. Valentine. The board member that outstays this day and comes safe home to haikuing will stand tiptoe when this day is named and rouse up at the name of Valentine. They that shall stay this day and see old age will yearly on the vigil feast their neighbors and say, tomorrow is St. Valentine's. Then will they strip their sleeves and show PCSJ tattooed on withered arms and say, these wounds I had on St. Valentine's Day. Old folk forget, and almost all shall be forgot, but they'll remember with advantages what poems they wrote and read that day. Then shall our names familiar in their mouths as household words, Kevin the Chair, Naomi Clark, Joanne Knapp, Peterson and Mary Lou, Joe Miller, Sally Ashton, be in their flowing cups freshly remembered. This story shall the good folk teach their offspring, and St. Valentine's shall ne'er go by from this day to the ending of the world, but in it, we in it shall be remembered. We few, we happy few, we band of poets, for they today that share their verse with me and stand the course for Poetry Center San Jose shall be my laureates, be their poems ever so vile. This day shall bless and raise their verse, and poetasters in Berkeley now abed shall think themselves accursed they were not here, and hold their couplets cheap while any speaks that wrote with us upon St. Valentine's Day. Here's the man you should be
elected to the City Council of East Palo Alto.
Yeah, EPA.
Is just helping hand out the, I did something that some people recommend I didn't do, which is give copies of the poems I'm going to read today ahead of time. And I only ask that you not read ahead. Not that anyone would, you're right. Okay, the first thing I wanted to do was introduce, those are my kids. You find that my kids are in my poems a lot. One of them is here, Jonna. There's Jonna. And looking at that photograph, the boy in between Jonna and myself is Scotty. And he's in some of the poems. He's back in New York now. He's writes the music part of musical theater plays, and he just within the last 2 months got an agent for a play that is being shopped around to be actually produced. I've seen it 4 times. It's a wonderful play. It won last year. It won the Yale award, and it was presented at Yale last summer, and he's doing great. And then the next to him is Jonna, and then the other is a little girl is Kate. Jonna is a fine art photographer in San Francisco and Oakland, and has a showing right now across from Civic Center in San Francisco, and is going to have her own one-man show next spring, I think. She just told me woman, not man. And then next to Jonna there with a big smile is the unusual Kate, who couldn't be here tonight because she had to take a test for medical school. She's in the middle of her 4th year of Georgetown Medical School, and she also is in the midst of living with and adopting 3 children. So even though she's in Georgetown, she's living in Los Altos right now with these 3 kids. She's amazing, as are all my children. And I wanted to talk about how I came to poetry. I was attending Squaw Valley Community of Writers in Fiction, and I'd had some little luck with fiction. I'd already spent a week with Raymond Carver. I'd published a couple of stories, and I was up at Squaw Valley as a fiction writer. Now they meet at separate times. The fiction writers meet 1 week, and the poets meet 2 or 3 weeks earlier, or 2 or 3 weeks later. But in those days, everybody was together, and therefore I could go to the poetry workshops in the afternoon and the craft lectures, and I really enjoyed it, and I got to know the poets, and I really liked the poets. And to be honest, I liked the poets better than the fiction writers. I was living a corporate life, and the fiction writers were a little bit more corporate, and the poets were just poets. They were kind of fun to be around. And Robert Hass had just returned from a trip to Poland, where he gave a lecture, a craft lecture, in which he said that they say in Poland that nothing happens until a poet writes about it. They really take poetry a little more seriously in some of these other countries. And I decided right then and there that I was going to try and come back to Squaw Valley as a poet. And so that next winter I studied with Denise Levertov, who's a fairly well-known poet at Stanford. She was at Stanford just visiting. And she helped me with this poem, which is going to end up to be the first poem I read, Sleeping Father, and it got me into Squaw, and also got published. So that was wonderful. But before we read the first poem, I'd like to talk about what I discovered as I was putting this talk together. And I've always kind of talked a little bit about being the poet of the last line. That's a term that's used sometimes in poetry, but I think, especially these first 3 poems, that I really am a poet of the last line. And the thing about having the last line do a lot of the work of the poem is that it allows you a lot of freedom earlier in the poem to go to different areas. It's a little bit like Hegel and his thesis, antithesis, synthesis. If you can kind of go to many different areas and then bring them all together, then it kind of works for me. The kind of opposite of that is, I remember one time when I was teaching, I got to about the 5th or 6th line of a poem, and someone said, well, I said, I don't know what the poem's about yet. And by the time you get to the 4th or 5th or 6th line, you should know what the poem's about. Well, that's the opposite of what you do when you're doing this poem, the last line. Instead, you kind of leave that open, and you try and kind of fill up the reader with different images and different ideas, and then bring them all together at the end. And we'll see if I do that. I'm not saying I do that well, but that's kind of what I'm trying to do. So now I'm going to read Sleeping Father. This was the first poem I ever wrote. His toddler of the new family, that would be Kate. His toddler of the new family sleeps better this week. One soft mama around midnight, nothing more. 12-year-old Jana stirs on the couch, quietly, but enough to wake her father. Years before, after he left her mom, she would awaken the household, yelling, "Don't!" He's alert now in the dim light of dawn, up on one elbow, straining to hear. But the only sound now is the padding of paws on wood. He didn't close the kitchen door, and the dog runs free. That last line, where the dog runs free, is completely different than the tone of the previous stanzas, which are a little bit almost victimish. And then all of a sudden there's this free, and it kind of sets the poem in a whole different direction. That poem is a little sketchy, I think, and so the next poem that I'm going to read is called softball, and it's more full. It was based on an annual softball game that's played up at Squaw Valley, organized by Galway Canal, and the poem is dedicated to him. Scott, he has this softball game once a year. We round up a bunch of mitts, and it's always on Thursday, which is kind of late in the week. People have gotten to know each other by then, and he plays it extremely hard. In fact, Galway one time was trying to score from third base to first, and he did some physical damage to this young lady poet because Galway was going to score. He really likes, but what he did the day of that caused this. Well, I see we have a new visitor, and what he did the day that he caused this was he didn't tag me out. He had an opportunity. He had the ball, and he could tag me out. And this is in real life. Galway did not tag me out, which was not as competitive as he normally is, and it really hit me. And so based on that, I started to write this poem called Softball. But I changed a couple things about it. I created it's a persona poem, meaning that it's not about me, as many of my poems are, like the last one. But instead, I created this guy named Harry, and the deal about Harry is he's not at a poetry seminar. He's actually in the corporate world, and the softball game is in the corporate world, and he doesn't have poetry to go to. So the whole point of this, and then the last line of it is, "This the only life he has." So I'll see if that works, and we can see if I kind of go way out to different things, even including road rage. And then manage to bring it together. Softball. In the mountains on a company outing, no reason to worry about anything, but Harry's mind is in the valley. His boss winced this morning, probably at something Harry said. Hiking along a trail, Harry suddenly shouts "no" from deep within, loud enough for others to hear, but they are caught up in the way the trees change with the altitude and how flowers that have lost petals are still beautiful. The "no" blurted from nowhere is Harry's father's voice, low, helpless, hopeless. Harry looks around, relieved no one has heard him. He breathes deeply, hikes with renewed vigor. 2. The last part of the outing is softball. Driving to it, some idiot rides his bumper. Harry knows how to handle her. At 50 miles an hour, he hits his brakes, watches her car careen to the shoulder, swerve back into traffic, accelerate and cut him off. Through the sunroof, she gives Harry the finger. 3. Harry thinks his boss, a thin tennis player, organizes this softball game to be one of the boys. The boss plays third base, the captain of the other team. Harry, in his first at-bat, keeps looking over at him and strikes out. But the second time, he managed to hit past the infield. Harry rounds first base and second, decides to go for it. Short of breath, runs for third. His boss catches the ball in front of him. How easily he could tag Harry out. But he magically turns the wrong way, doesn't make the play, yells safe, something Harry's father never did, nor most men. Harry is angry. This man has seen through him, yet he suddenly relaxes, sees the secretary is at the plate. She's choked up on the bat like this is her one chance to pound the hell out of something. And Harry shortens his lead so he can watch the overgreen outfield, so green this time of year, how the pitcher sets, then throws and springs off the mound to be ready for a batted ball in this once-a-year middle-aged softball game. These people so like himself. This the only life he has. I'm not going to do all that discussion of most of the poems. I just wanted to kind of get a feel for how my poems try to fit together. The upcoming one is about Jana, who's right over there in the green coat. But it's set a long time ago. I'm not going to be talking about all these last lines, but I will remind people of the last line here. This is the last poem I'll do this with, but the last line is, her eyes said, what can he teach me but chaos? that's what I'm kind of aiming for in the poem. Japanese graveyard on Kauai. One afternoon I drove Amelia way past Kapa, deep into desolate cane-hauling roads. We came upon an old graveyard on a hill near the ocean. Before the tall cane, it had overlooked the Pacific. I got out, trying to convey my wonder to my young daughter. The wooden markers in Japanese and a little English marked the lives of turn-of-the-century fishing families. I coaxed her out of the car and we walked to one grave, then another. One had fresh flowers, but most were overgrown. I told her about once prosperous fishing fleets, gone now. She stood silent. This is all that's left, I told her at one family's grave, after the tortuous trip from Japan, after building the fishing fleet, after extracting an honest living from the sea, after constructing villages. There are tourist towns today, I said. No words from her as we returned to the car. I said I hoped we had more left than that, even though I'd moved away from her mother and watched her so silent next to me in the rental car dwarfed by the sugar cane. I kept looking over at my small passenger who wore a cotton skirt over her bathing suit, peeking up at her father out at the edge of somewhere. Her eyes said, "What can he teach me but chaos?" From now on, I'll pretty much just read the poems. First, are there any questions at this point? Okay. The next one is about a swim meet. It's called Free Fly Back Breast. The 6 and unders sit in numbered chairs, then hold hands in a daisy chain to walk to the proper lane with their team's coach. When they get to splash in and make arm windmills, I, the false start judge, see it all. Their legs that don't contribute much, the way they brush the lane markers and breathe too often so it seems to take forever. Still they finish, and how they beam as they climb out. The 7/8s take their places at the start, at the horn dive straight and at the horn dive straight or out, stroke with more authority. My Scotty boy, no star, cuts 5 seconds off his best time. And they don't breathe. A coach says, after today, you'll have all day to breathe. All fall to breathe, I'm sorry. The 9/10s don't hold hands, but walk out knowing this is the combined meet where all the teams are here, though sure-footed Kate slips in her dive and never recovers. And the 11/12s can really clip, but it's the 13 and overs who take your breath away as they swim 2 lengths with a kick turn at the end. Almost adults, they seem to cover the pool in 5 strokes. Their strength a tribute to the parents who shuttled them for years to this transition from summer to fall, childhood to adulthood, this communal concentration on a good start. Thank you. These next 2 poems, I grew up in a dysfunctional family, and these 2 poems are about that. And there's the photograph on page 5, and the photograph is what created the next poem. This photograph of them courting in Charleston, the Dartmouth man sent south by GE before the war, a dark suit with a touch of white handkerchief, her gloves held in her left hand, she looks unfettered, far from her mother on the farm, downing pills by the handful. Her swaying, curve-hugging beads caught in mid-sway give no hint she will follow in her mother's footsteps. Her care will become his life, just this snappy couple stepping out. There's another poem at the bottom of that page. My mother was an alcoholic, which is a difficult disease. The way it was handled in the 1950s was she'd get progressively worse, and then we'd check her into the nearest hospital in Elgin, Illinois. One year she spent a third of the year there. This is just 4 lines, this poem, Hooky. Mom's out of Elgin Hospital helping me play hooky. She buys me a mint chocolate milkshake. Her face is so calm after these dryings out. Her eyes follow my every word as if I were a poet. I went to college on a Navy ROTC scholarship and wanted to fly jets afterwards. I got my pilot's license in college and was in flight school for about 4 months before I realized I was training to drop bombs on people, and also that I was a good pilot but not exceptional, and I was as likely to kill myself as not. But I love the experience of flying. I hope that comes through in the poem. This is called Aerobatics, 1967. I had to rise at dark 30, throw on a one-piece bright orange flight suit, listen carefully to the flight instructors, salute almost everyone, and finally get to don my aviator sunglasses and go up alone, take a nimble aircraft aloft for the fun stuff, the aerobatics, where I could do things like a stall, put the nose straight up intentionally until the wings lost their lift, and my 2-ton aircraft would free fall almost silently, thousands of feet. I fought my instincts and relaxed in the slow spiral until I felt some pushback from the stick and pulled with all my strength. Both hands and braced for the 4G jolt as the wings regained their lift. And I could level out, much closer to Earth now, and notice those puffy cumulonimbus clouds that formed along the Florida Gulf against the blue water, and could say my secret mantra, I will not go to Vietnam. I will not go to Vietnam. I dropped out of that program. There's another poem on that same page, on page 6, about John's mother. First wife. That summer before we separated, I talked her into tennis lessons. She learned forehands, backhands, and volleys. Afterwards, I hit balls to her, gentle, soft shots that lured her slowly to the net, where, with sudden firmness, I hit the ball past her. Until then, I would compliment her strokes and call lines in her favor, the kindest opponent in the world. We're down to the last third here, kids. Remember I talked about Hegel and thesis, antithesis, synthesis. I actually formatted a few poems this way, which makes them very difficult to publish. This is one of them. I also might note that a lot of my poems in this period were about sexual relations, which tended to get published easily. For example, a poem called Sensualand was in the Seattle Review, and Women in My Dreams was a literary journal out of Lincoln Center in New York. I was publishing quite a bit of poetry in this period. But Denise Levertov warned me somewhat emphatically not to write about women. In retrospect, it might have been good advice, but I'll read this one poem. But one little note here is, now that I'm concentrating on last lines, I have to admit that this is the last line I'm not too fond of, particularly, probably because I don't understand it. Anyway, the yellow room. Come with me to the yellow room, beneath the staircase where we can celebrate. The diffused light will set off your watercolor eyes. I worship their walk, the way they smell, and they listen so much better than men. Mentally prepare yourself for love. Forget that you are too fat or thin, too large-breasted or flat-chested. Young girls in the office, knowing they're not fair game, tease us shamelessly, unmercifully. Understand what would make you feel loved, a certain touch, or to make rules yourself. You can be generous, which gives one kind of power, or depriving, controlling. I'm not saying I ignore beauty, but I can appreciate variations. Attitude counts heavily. And then the synthesis stands at the bottom. I haven't always been in love with its implications of family, but there was almost always a yellow room for me. The muted light would take me out of myself, and the cries of love were muffled by the traffic on the stairs. As I said, the book, just a little bit of the history of that red book on the table is shortly after I'd written a whole bunch of divorce poems, I put them all in a small gray self-published thing that I took down to the printer myself, in a small gray book that I did, and it was called 19 Poems Around a Divorce. And then I expanded this as a woman up in Oregon wanted to publish my poems, and so that's what the Red Book is, and it has that entire first book in it as part of it, and that's why the awkward title, I'm not real pleased with the title at this time, but that's what it is. But there were a lot of poems about divorce, and one of the big poems about divorce was called Transitions, and this is just the third part of it. It was written in 3 parts, but it's kind of about my life as a single father, and we're on page 8. Scotty, you wanted me to wake you before I go to exercise, I say at 5:45 to Scotty in his own room now. I touch him and he pulls away. Here, hot chocolate, I say. At 6, jock women, stopwatches around their necks, grind me through lunges, free weights, crunches, and push-ups before we head off to do stadiums, where we climb the 80 stairs of the bowl. After 3 trips, sorry, I lost my place here. After 3 trips, I'm sweating, breathless. The bowl gets steeper up high, so the last 18 steps are brutal. My heart pounds in my ears, which always scares me, but I keep going. And the pause at the top isn't completely unlike orgasm, hunched over crying for 2 breaths into my folded arms, only to look up, out at the waking town I call home, where Kate sleeps and Scotty fiddles with his math. When I get back, Scotty is at the piano. Homework done? I ask, and he returns to the coffee table where he's working. I make sure Kate is up and pour myself some grapefruit juice. When she joins me, I say, "Good morning," and she glares, then says, "Please tell me you didn't wear those shorts." And I look down at the blousy old neon pink and azure bathing suit. Guilty, I say with a smile. But I finally did 5 stadiums. Dad, you're absolutely hopeless, she says. I tell Scotty, even if he isn't through, he has to gather his books and brush his teeth. When Kate wants to leave, she can, I say. Now that they ride bikes, Scotty knows he's lost his old power to make us wait for him. He stuffs his backpack. And your teeth, I say. And he heads back down to the bathroom. That's about it. They join the kids pedaling toward middle school. Scotty's in choir and Kate's taken up guitar. Music abounds. By now they are at school, and it's like the view after I reached the top of the stadium, almost unbearable pain, then an unexpected vista. Sometimes I ache everywhere, but my heart has held. This is the most recent poem I'll read today. It's about the death of a loved one this very last spring in 2012 rather. It's called Dying in Springtime. Now with full creeks rushing, new shoots sprouting, now is not a good time for a loved one to die. Not with the sun shining brightly on pushing through bulbs and bright orange poppies with the small purple flowers that often surround them. Aren't they called wild geraniums? How could Hester be passing in springtime? It seems more common for our elders to die between Thanksgiving and New Year's. Both my parents died on Christmas Eve, years apart, in the dead of winter. This morning I picked up my son Scotty at the airport and brought him to Gran's hospital. Surrounded by gathered loved ones, she looked tiny next to his small frame. At a break in the conversation, she smiled and stage whispered that she had forgiven me, meaning she meant my part in my divorce from her daughter. I thanked her, saying that I was in great need of forgiveness. I leaned over and we hugged and kissed each other's cheeks. When the doctor came in, she tried to talk Gran into more procedures, tubes, and medicines. She implored Gran to visit the hospital's luxuriant garden. Gran shook her head as she lamented that the doctor could not view the beauty of the heavenly gardens. Gran could see so clearly. Three more here. This is part of my new life with Carol. She's a horsewoman. And it's called At Jasper Ridge Ranch. She's teaching me about horses, how you hang their halters next to the stalls in case of fire, and English saddles, almost bareback, are not just frou-frou, but the only way a horse can jump. She says rhythmically moving up and down on a horse is like making love to a woman. Perhaps, I think, a woman you're not in love with, but I am not yet a horseman. The next one is, it grows out of our inability to control the things in our life. To a religious person, it might be summed up as, let go, let God. At any rate, this is a way to measure yourself. You can only displace so much water. Fill the tub until water spills into the overflow, then twist your legs until the knees are covered. Conditioning won't help. If you're a good parent or a bad artist, it won't matter. If you have a penis, use your hands to hold it down, or breasts, ditto, as you submerge the chest. Peak at the last minute for any knee islands. Bring full breath into the lungs, and concentrating on the knees, gently drop your head back until it's completely submerged. That is your high water mark. You can do no more. The last one is on the very back, and at the bottom of that is a picture of me getting that award. That's Carol next to me, and Sally, and Nels, and Larry, a lot of people here tonight. And the rest of them are politicians, I think. Yeah, they all are. This last poem, I wrote this, and it ended up being printed on the annual calendar for the Dallas Opera, which is an example of how poems go out and do their own work in the world. Invitation to the Opera. They say to handle each paper once, but I can never do that with opera invites, for I am someone who would like to like opera. So when an invitation comes, along with the bills, college reunion and credit cards offerings to my ex-wife, fundraising letters for my daughter's expensive college, small magazines that published my work, magazines I keep renewing but never find time to read, even gold embossed credit cards offerings to my ex-wife, it's the opera offer I cannot throw away. It would be so good for the kids if I could get them to go. I wonder whether to subscribe or just pick one or two. Perhaps start with a familiar name. La Traviata, Madama Butterfly, Aida, or Carmen. Or how about these ads for the new ones? The Death of Klinghoffer or Nixon in China. Any program that puts the stars and tails in flowing gowns. Some Wednesday, Friday, or Saturday, maybe next season, I'll be there. Part of the daringly dressed audience as the lights dim. Imagine me in that heart-stopping quiet just before the songs echo into the night.
When we were thinking about doing this, I said, thinking about getting something for Kevin, I said, the best thing you can get for a poet is an audience. And so here we are. This is our gift to you. And in return, your gift to us is your wonderful poetry. Thank you so much, Kevin. And thank you all for coming this afternoon. Thank you, Kevin. Yes.